When the Galactic Defense Academy receives its first human exchange cadet, the alien instructors expect another primitive species struggling with basic technology. But when 22-year-old Sarah Mitchell approaches the Academy's most secure biometric scanner, one that has classified every species in the galaxy for millennia, it doesn't just grant her access. It recognizes something impossible. She registers as creator-level clearance, a designation that shouldn't exist. As panic spreads through the alien hierarchy, they realize humanity isn't just another species joining the galactic community. They might be the original architects of the technology that built their entire civilization. Instructor Zixtar clicked his mandibles in what his species considered a sigh, though it sounded more like someone stepping on bubble wrap. 23 years of teaching at the Galactic Defense Academy, and they were still sending him the rejects. Well, not exactly rejects. More like the species everyone else was too polite to refuse but too smart to actually want. The morning briefing had been particularly painful. Another cultural exchange program, they called it, as if the galaxy needed more ways to complicate military efficiency with feelings and diversity training. Zixtar adjusted his teaching tablet with one of his forearms, while using another to scratch behind his sensor cluster. His species, the Vorthak, had evolved excellent multitasking abilities, which made him perfect for handling multiple disappointments simultaneously. "Today, we receive our first human exchange cadet," announced Dean Kolthara over the Academy's comming system. Her voice carried that forced enthusiasm administrators used when trying to make terrible news sound exciting. "This represents a historic moment in interspecies cooperation and learning." Right, historic. Like the time they tried integrating those furry Kethmorians who kept shedding all over the weapon systems, or the incident with the crystalline Nexari, who shattered every time someone raised their voice during tactical exercises. Historic disasters, every single one. Zixtar shuffled through his data pad, reading the preliminary reports on this new species, humans, from a little backwater planet called Earth in some forgotten spiral arm. Recent space travel capability, barely 50 years since they figured out faster-than-light communication. Their military technology was laughably primitive by galactic standards. Projectile weapons, chemical propulsion, and something called duct tape that they apparently used to fix everything from spacecraft to international relations. The Academy itself stood as a monument to proper galactic engineering. 15 kilometers of reinforced biosteel and quantum-locked corridors housing the finest military training facility in 3 sectors. The security systems alone represented technological achievements that most species took centuries to understand. Biometric scanners that could read genetic patterns down to the quantum level, neural interface training pods that adapted to any known brain structure, and defensive systems that could repel everything from telepathic attacks to dimensional invasion attempts. Everything was automated, efficient, and absolutely foolproof, which was why Zixtar particularly enjoyed watching new species try to operate equipment designed by civilizations that had mastered space travel when their ancestors were still figuring out fire. "She should be arriving at the main entrance now," crackled another announcement. She, at least this human, was female, which hopefully meant fewer territorial displays and chest beating that seemed to plague most male members of warrior species. Though with humans, who could tell? Their files indicated they were one of those chaotic species that couldn't decide if they wanted to fight, mate, or have philosophical discussions at any given moment. Zixtar made his way to the observation deck overlooking the main entrance plaza. Several other instructors had gathered as well. Apparently, everyone wanted to see the latest addition to their collection of galactic oddities. The plaza itself was impressive enough to humble most newcomers. A vast space surrounded by towering spires of living metal that shifted colors based on the Academy's alert status. Currently, they glowed a peaceful blue-green, though Zixtar suspected that might change quickly once the humans started breaking things. The transport shuttle landed with typical Galactic Navy precision, its engines humming with the barely contained power of a small star. The airlock cycled open with a satisfying hiss of equalizing atmosphere, and out stepped, well, that was unexpected. The human was smaller than anticipated. The files indicated average height for her species, but somehow Zixtar had expected something more imposing. Instead, what emerged was a relatively compact biped, with brown hair tied back in what appeared to be a functional knot, wearing a simple grey uniform that looked like it had been designed by someone who had heard clothing described but never actually seen any. Sarah Mitchell, according to his files, 22 standard years old, which made her practically a larva by galactic standards. Military background from something called the Space Force, which sounded about as intimidating as a wet tissue. She carried a single bag over her shoulder and looked around the plaza with the kind of casual interest most people reserved for grocery shopping. "That is supposed to be our first human?" muttered Krelonox, the Zelonian weapons instructor, his scales shifting to a skeptical orange. "She looks like she got lost on the way to civilian transportation." Zixtar had to agree. Where was the expected primitive awe? The stammering wonder at superior galactic technology? Most new species spent their first hour just staring at the living architecture with their various visual organs hanging open. This human was examining her surroundings with the kind of practical assessment someone might give a used vehicle they were considering purchasing. She walked toward the main entrance with an easy stride, completely unimpressed by the towering gates that had been designed to inspire reverence and mild intimidation. The security arch scanned her automatically, running through its standard protocols for new arrivals. And that was when things started to get interesting. The morning security sweep was as routine as Zixtar's complaints about the cafeteria's artificial protein paste. Every cadet, instructor and maintenance worker had to pass through the biometric scanners before accessing any part of the academy beyond the basic common areas. It was a simple process that took roughly 3 seconds per individual and had worked flawlessly for the past 4 centuries. The scanner itself was a marvel of galactic engineering, a sleek arch of dark metal embedded with quantum sensors that could analyze everything from genetic markers to psychological state in the time it took most beings to blink. It had been designed by the ancients, those mysterious precursors who had left advanced technology scattered across the galaxy before mysteriously vanishing. Like most ancient tech, it worked perfectly, required no maintenance, and made everyone feel slightly inferior just by existing. "Next," called out Sergeant Tanara, the Krillian security officer, whose 4 eyes allowed her to monitor multiple scanner readouts simultaneously while keeping watch for troublemakers. Her voice carried that particular tone of someone who had performed the same task thousands of times and could probably do it while unconscious. The line moved with military efficiency. Cadet Voxtel, a Vorthak like Zixtar himself, stepped through the arch. The scanner's lights shifted from blue to green, and the display showed his familiar information. Species Vorthak. Classification, standard military personnel. Clearance level Cadet Tier 3. Access granted. 3 seconds. Perfect. Next came Lysander, a particularly arrogant Zelonian whose scales shifted to smug purple every time he successfully navigated technology. The scanner hummed briefly, analyzed his reptilian genetics, cross-referenced his neural patterns, and displayed Species Zelonian. Classification, standard military personnel. Clearance level, Cadet Tier 3, access granted. Another 3 seconds. The machine was nothing if not consistent. Zixtar watched from his position near the security station, sipping something that might have been coffee if coffee came from a planet where the beans were radioactive and bitter enough to strip paint. He enjoyed the morning routine, partly because it was predictable and partly because he liked watching cocky young cadets discover that their species' advanced biology was just another entry in the scanner's vast database. The Krillian twins went through together. Their species could share quantum entanglement when touching, so the scanner had to read them as a unit. Species, Krillian, pair bond. Classification, standard military personnel. Clearance level, Cadet Tier 3. Access granted. 6 seconds total, which was still within acceptable parameters. Even the exotic species processed smoothly. Cadet Moradeth, whose people existed partially in hyperspace, caused the scanner to work a bit harder as it tracked his multidimensional signature, but still, species nexus entity. Classification, standard military personnel. Clearance level, Cadet Tier 3. Access granted. 8 seconds, which was actually impressive considering half of him existed in another reality. The scanner had never failed to identify a species. Its database contained genetic and energy signatures for every known intelligent life form in the galaxy, along with several that had gone extinct centuries ago. It could distinguish between subspecies, identify hybrid offspring, and even detect shapeshifters trying to mask their true nature. Which was why, when Sarah Mitchell stepped up to the scanner with the casual confidence of someone approaching a revolving door, everyone expected the usual 3-second processing time. She walked through the arch without breaking stride, hands clasped behind her back in a relaxed military posture. The scanner's sensors activated immediately, bathing her in a soft blue light that seemed to intensify as it began its analysis. 3 seconds passed. The light flickered. 5 seconds. The scanner's humming changed pitch, taking on a slightly higher, more urgent tone. Probably just calibrating for a new species, Sergeant Tanera said, though one of her eyes remained fixed on the readout display. Sometimes the first scan takes longer. 10 seconds. The blue light was now cycling through different intensities, and Zixtar could hear additional processing units coming online. The scanner was working harder than he had ever seen it work, its quantum processors churning through data at maximum capacity. Sarah stood in the middle of the arch, looking mildly curious about the delay but not particularly concerned. She examined the inner workings of the scanner with the same practical interest she had shown the plaza architecture, occasionally nodding as if confirming something she already knew. 15 seconds. "Is it supposed to make that noise?" asked Cadet Voxtel, pointing one of his forearms at the scanner. The machine was now producing a sound like a computer trying to solve an equation that had too many variables, a sort of electronic whimpering. 20 seconds. The display screen, which usually showed species identification within moments, was cycling through what appeared to be thousands of entries. Genetic patterns flashed by too quickly to read, accompanied by compatibility percentages, probability matrices, and error messages that Zixtar had never seen before. "Maybe we should," Sergeant Tanara started to say. 25 seconds. The scanner's lights suddenly flashed red, then yellow, then a color that did not exist in most species' visual spectrum. The humming stopped abruptly, replaced by a silence so complete that everyone in the security area instinctively held their breath. The display screen went completely black. Sarah tilted her head slightly, studying the now silent machine with the kind of expression someone might wear while watching a piece of particularly stubborn technology decide whether it wanted to cooperate. "Well," she said in a voice that carried just a hint of amusement, "that is new." The screen flickered once, twice, then displayed a single word in bright red letters, "Error." Then it went black again. Then it flickered back to life, ran through what appeared to be an entire diagnostic sequence, and went dark once more. Sergeant Tanera looked at her superior officers with 3 of her 4 eyes while keeping the 4th focused on Sarah. "Should I call maintenance?" The scanner chose that moment to emit a sound like a quantum computer having an existential crisis, followed by a series of beeps that somehow managed to convey mechanical confusion. Sarah remained standing calmly in the arch, apparently content to wait while the most advanced biometric scanner in the galaxy had what could only be described as a nervous breakdown. After 30 seconds of what could only be described as electronic panic, the scanner suddenly went silent, the kind of silence that made everyone lean forward unconsciously, waiting for either resolution or explosion. Zixtar found himself holding his breath, which was particularly annoying since his species could breathe through their skin in emergencies. The display screen flickered once more, and text began appearing with the deliberate slowness of a system working through something it had never encountered before. Species: Homo sapiens. Classification: unknown. Cross-referencing: at least it had figured out what she was. That was progress. Genetic markers: confirmed. Neural patterns: confirmed. Biometric signature: confirmed. Standard procedure: nothing unusual there. Quantum resonance: anomalous. Zixtar's mandibles clicked involuntarily. Anomalous quantum resonance was usually associated with ancient technology or beings that existed partially outside normal space-time. Neither category seemed likely for a species that had just figured out interstellar travel. Historical database access initiated. That was odd. The historical database was only accessed when the scanner encountered something that required deep archival research. The last time that had happened was when they discovered that extinct precursor artifact 3 years ago, cross-referencing genetic patterns with ancient archives.
Wait, what?
Match found. Everyone in the security area stopped breathing simultaneously. A match in the ancient archives meant the scanner had found this individual's genetic signature in records that were older than most civilizations, confirming identity parameters. The screen went blank for a full 10 seconds. When it came back online, it displayed information that made absolutely no sense whatsoever. Species: Homo sapiens. Individual: Sarah Mitchell. Security classification maximum. Access level creator. Zixtar's teaching tablet slipped from his primary manipulator and clattered to the floor. Around the security checkpoint, the sound of various alien respiratory systems stopping could be heard as a collective intake of breath that seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the room. Creator-level access did not exist. It was a theoretical classification mentioned in technical manuals as a fail-safe category that would never be used. The kind of clearance level that ancient database architects included because they were thorough, not because they expected it to ever appear on anyone's identification. Creator-level access meant unlimited authority over every system in the galaxy that used ancient technology, which, as it happened, was almost every system more advanced than a stone axe. "That cannot be correct," Sergeant Tanara said, her voice carrying the tone of someone whose entire worldview had just been fed through a garbage disposal. "Run a diagnostic on the scanner. It is obviously malfunctioning." The scanner, as if offended by the suggestion, immediately ran a full self-diagnostic sequence, displaying green check marks for every single system component. "Working perfectly, thank you very much." Sarah, still standing calmly in the scanner arch, looked at the display with mild interest. "Huh," she said, with the same tone someone might use when noticing an unexpected sale at the grocery store. "That explains a few things." The security alert klaxons chose that moment to begin wailing throughout the academy. Apparently, someone had noticed that their most secure scanner had just granted theoretical maximum access to a member of a species most people considered barely capable of space travel. Cadet Voxtel was making a sound like a kettle reaching critical pressure. "Creator level? That's impossible. Only the ancients had creator-level access, and they disappeared millennia ago." "Maybe she's descended from them?" suggested Lysander, his scales shifting through a rapid spectrum of colors that indicated severe confusion. "Some kind of ancient human hybrid." "The ancients were energy beings who transcended physical form," Cadet Moradith pointed out, his voice echoing from multiple dimensions simultaneously. "They could not have hybrid offspring with corporeal species." "Then how do you explain this?" demanded the Krillian twins in perfect unison, pointing at the display with their forearms. Sarah stepped out of the scanner arch, which immediately returned to its normal standby blue glow, as if nothing unusual had happened. "Well," she said reasonably, "either your machine is broken, or you guys have been using our technology for the past few thousand years and just forgot where you got it." The security area went completely silent. Even the klaxons seemed to pause in consideration of this statement. Zixtar felt something that might have been the beginning of understanding tickle at the edges of his consciousness, followed immediately by a much stronger sensation that could only be described as existential dread. "What do you mean, our technology?" Sarah shrugged, a gesture that somehow managed to convey both casualness and the potential reorganization of galactic civilization. "The scanner, the Academy systems, most of the stuff I've seen since I got here, it's all built on human design principles, just bigger and more complicated. Like someone took our blueprints and spent a few centuries adding unnecessary bells and whistles." The klaxons were now joined by announcement chimes indicating incoming priority communications from Academy Administration, Sector Command, and what sounded like several galactic government departments that Zixtar had not even known existed. "That is impossible," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Human technology is primitive. Chemical rockets, projectile weapons, communication systems that require physical infrastructure." "Oh, that's just the stuff we let everyone see," Sarah replied, examining the scanner arch with the kind of professional interest a mechanic might show when looking under the hood of a familiar car. "We learned a long time ago that showing off advanced technology tends to make neighbors nervous. Better to let people think you're harmless until you need to not be." Security Chief Brolthog came running around the corner, his 8 legs moving in perfect coordination despite the obvious panic in his multifaceted eyes. "What is the situation? Why are we receiving creator-level security alerts? Who authorized?" He stopped mid-sentence when he saw the display screen, which was still cheerfully showing Sarah's impossible clearance level. "Sir," Sergeant Tanara said, her voice remarkably steady considering the circumstances, "I think we need to contact the Galactic Council, immediately." Sarah looked around at the gathering crowd of increasingly agitated aliens, all of whom were staring at her with expressions ranging from awe to terror to the kind of confusion that preceded either enlightenment or nervous breakdown. "Is this going to be a big thing?" she asked, with the tone of someone who had just realized they might have accidentally started a galactic incident. "Because I was really looking forward to those tactical simulation classes." Chief Administrator Kelnoth arrived at the security checkpoint with the kind of purposeful stride that indicated someone was about to have a very bad day. Her species, the Kethlari, were known for their methodical approach to problem-solving and their complete inability to tolerate nonsense. Standing nearly 3 meters tall with 6 arms and a cranial ridge that could cut glass, she was exactly the kind of person you called when reality needed to be firmly reminded of its proper place. "Explain," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 40 years turning chaos into order through sheer force of administrative will. Security Chief Bralthok's mandibles were clicking so rapidly they sounded like an old-fashioned typewriter. "Ma'am, the biometric scanner has identified the human exchange cadet as having creator-level access. We have run diagnostics, and the system appears to be functioning normally." Kelnoth's 6 eyes focused on the display screen with the kind of intensity usually reserved for disintegrating enemy ships. "Creator-level access is a theoretical classification. It does not exist in practical application." "That's what we thought, ma'am." "Run the scan again." Sarah, who had been watching the proceedings with the calm interest of someone observing an elaborate dance they did not quite understand, stepped back toward the scanner. "Happy to help," she said, "though I should probably mention that repeating the same process usually gives you the same results." The scanner activated immediately, as if it had been waiting for her return. This time the identification process took only 5 seconds, apparently. Having figured out what Sarah was, it no longer needed to consult its entire database. Species, Homo sapiens. Individual, Sarah Mitchell. Access level, creator. Welcome back. Welcome back. The scanner had never said welcome back to anyone in the 4 centuries it had been operational. "Run a level 7 diagnostic on the scanner core," Kelnoth ordered, her voice taking on the edge that preceded either solutions or explosions. Sergeant Tanrara's fingers flew over her control panel. "Running diagnostic, all systems green. Scanner integrity at 100%. Database connections verified. Quantum processors operating within normal parameters. Test it on another subject." Cadet Voxtel stepped forward reluctantly. The scanner processed him in the usual 3 seconds. Species Vorthak. Classification standard military personnel. Clearance level Cadet Tier 3. Access granted. Normal, perfectly, boringly normal. Kelnoth's cranial ridge had developed a slight twitch. "Test the human again." Sarah obligingly walked through the scanner a 3rd time. Species, Homo sapiens. Individual, Sarah Mitchell. Access level creator. All systems responding to administrative authority. The phrase administrative authority made Kelnoth's left eye start twitching as well. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," Sarah said thoughtfully, "that your scanner thinks I'm authorized to modify, repair or control any system that shares its basic architecture, which, from what I've seen, is most of the technology on this station." Emergency communications were now flooding in from across the sector. The Academy's quantum communication array lit up with priority messages from the Galactic Defense Council, the Interspecies Technology Commission, the Archive Keepers, and several departments that Zixtar was fairly certain were supposed to be classified. "We need a full administrative meeting," Kelnoth announced. "Now, lockdown protocols for the human until we understand what we're dealing with." "Ma'am," Sarah interjected politely, "I don't think lockdown protocols are going to work if I actually have creator-level access. Those systems would probably just ignore any commands that conflict with my authorization." This was met with the kind of silence that preceded either profound understanding or complete mental breakdown. Within 20 minutes, every senior administrator, department head and security chief on the station had assembled in Conference Room Alpha. The room itself was a monument to galactic cooperation, with seating arrangements designed to accommodate the wildly different anatomies of 17 different species. Under normal circumstances, it was used for graduation ceremonies and diplomatic visits. These were not normal circumstances. "Let me understand this correctly," said Fleet Admiral Crestew, a Zalonian whose scales had shifted to the deep purple that indicated either extreme concentration or impending stroke. "You are telling me that a member of a species we considered technologically primitive has somehow achieved a security clearance that should not exist?" "That is correct," Kelnoth replied, her administrative composure beginning to show stress fractures. "And this clearance grants her theoretical control over ancient technology installations." "Also correct. Including the technology that runs this academy, our fleet systems, and approximately 70% of galactic infrastructure." Unfortunately, yes. Archive Keeper Thelmo spoke up from the corner where his floating mobility pod hummed quietly. As one of the few beings old enough to remember when ancient technology was first discovered, his perspective carried weight. Creator-level access was programmed into ancient systems as a fail-safe. The original architects included it as a way to ensure that their technology could always be controlled by its rightful inheritors. But the ancients disappeared, protested Commander Yilneth. They transcended physical existence thousands of years ago. Did they? The Lomos asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a toxic gas cloud. You cannot be suggesting, Admiral Crestu said slowly, that humans are descended from the ancients. I am suggesting, the Lomos replied, that perhaps we have been making assumptions about both human development and ancient disappearance that may not be entirely accurate. Director of Xenobiology Pralvex pulled up her species database on the conference room's main display. Human genetic records show they evolved naturally on their home planet. There is no indication of ancient intervention or hybrid development. Unless, Kilnoth said thoughtfully, the ancients did not disappear at all, unless they simply regressed, chose to return to a simpler existence while maintaining the genetic markers that would allow them to reclaim their technology when necessary. The conference room erupted in simultaneous translation of what could only be described as galactic profanity. You're saying, Commander Yilneth said slowly, that humans might be ancients who decided to take a few thousand-year vacation from advanced civilization. It would explain why their technology development seems accelerated, noted Intelligence Chief Vorathan. Most species take millennia to progress from spaceflight to interstellar travel. Humans achieved it in decades. It would also explain, added Fleet Engineer Colves, why human engineering solutions often seem to work better than our own, despite appearing more primitive. Through the conference room's viewing ports, they could see the Academy's main plaza, where Sarah Mitchell was sitting on a bench, apparently unconcerned by the galaxy-spanning crisis she had inadvertently triggered. She was reading what appeared to be a technical manual, and occasionally nodding in a way that suggested she was correcting the information rather than learning from it. What do we do? Asked Admiral Crestu finally. Kelnoth looked around the room at the assembled leadership of one of the galaxy's most advanced institutions, all of whom were now staring at her expectantly. We, she said with the tone of someone announcing that reality had submitted its resignation, are going to have a very interesting conversation with our human exchange cadet. The conference room had been cleared of everyone except the essential personnel, which apparently included Zixtar because someone needed to take notes, and everyone else was too busy having existential crises. Sarah sat in a chair designed for beings roughly twice her size, looking remarkably comfortable for someone who had just accidentally destabilized galactic civilization. So Chief Administrator Kelnoth began, her 6 arms folded in what her species considered a neutral negotiating posture. Perhaps you could explain how you seem to have creator-level access to ancient technology. Sarah considered this question with the kind of thoughtful expression people wore when trying to figure out how to explain something obvious to someone who really should have figured it out themselves. Well, she said finally, it's not really ancient technology, is it? It's just human technology that's been sitting around for a while. The silence that followed this statement was so complete that Zixtar could hear his own circulatory system functioning. Human technology, Admiral Crestu repeated slowly, his scales shifting to a color that did not exist in most species' emotional spectrum. Right, I mean the design principles are pretty obvious once you know what to look for. Sarah gestured toward the conference room's control panel. Mind if I show you what I mean? Before anyone could object, she walked over to what was supposedly one of the most sophisticated communication arrays in the galaxy. The interface was a complex arrangement of holographic displays, quantum switches, and neural connection ports that required 6 months of specialized training to operate safely. Sarah looked at it for about 3 seconds, then reached out and touched a sequence of controls that should not have responded to her biometrics. They responded anyway. See, this is classic human interface design, she said, conversationally while the display reconfigured itself in ways that made the technology specialists in the room start making small whimpering sounds, multiple redundant access points, intuitive control clustering, and fail-safe defaults. We always built our systems assuming the user might be stressed, injured, or working in less than ideal conditions. The communication array was now displaying information that several people in the room did not have clearance to see, organized in a format that was somehow both more comprehensive and easier to understand than the standard layout. Of course, you've added a lot of unnecessary complexity over the years, Sarah continued, manipulating controls with the casual ease of someone adjusting a car radio. All these authentication protocols and security layers and user restrictions. We designed the original systems to be operated by anyone who needed to use them. The whole point was reliability under adverse conditions. Archive Keeper Thelmus's mobility pod drifted closer, his ancient eyes fixed on the display. The interface, it's responding to her as if I designed it, Sarah finished helpfully. Well, not me personally, but my species did. Though I have to say, some of these modifications you've made are pretty creative, not necessarily better, but creative. She touched another control, and the room's environmental systems came online, displaying a three-dimensional model of the Academy's entire life support network. This is a good example, actually. The basic atmospheric processing design is solid, one of ours from maybe 3,000 years ago, based on the quantum signature. But you've added all these monitoring subsystems and automated alerts and backup protocols. Director Pralvex leaned forward, her scientific curiosity apparently overriding her growing sense of cosmic horror. You can read quantum signatures. Can't everyone? Sarah asked, then seemed to notice the expressions around the room. Oh, apparently not. Humans have always been pretty good with technology. It's sort of intuitive for us. We see how things work. We understand the underlying principles. We make improvements. She gestured at the environmental display, where several subsystems were highlighted in colors that indicated various states of efficiency. Like this atmospheric recycling loop. The original design was simple and robust. Take in whatever air you have, process it, output breathable atmosphere for any known species. Your version has all these species-specific optimization routines that actually make the system less efficient overall. Less efficient. Commander Yilneth sounded personally offended. Well, yeah, instead of one universal process, you're running 17 different atmospheric profiles simultaneously. It works, but it uses about 40% more power than necessary and has 16 more potential failure points. Sarah touched a few more controls, and the display shifted to show a simplified version of the system. This would work better, one adaptive algorithm that adjusts to whatever biological requirements it detects. Simpler, more efficient, more reliable. Fleet Engineer Colves was staring at the display with the expression of someone watching their entire career being casually rewritten. That would actually work better. The power consumption alone would be significant, Sarah agreed. Though honestly, your power generation systems are pretty overcomplicated too. You're using quantum fusion reactors with about 12 layers of safety protocols and efficiency dampeners. The original human design was much more straightforward. She walked over to another panel and activated what Zixtar recognized as the Academy's main power grid display. Within seconds, she had reconfigured the interface to show power flow patterns that made the reactor efficiency statistics look like someone had been deliberately trying to waste energy. See, humans learned early on that simple systems last longer and break less often, Sarah explained, highlighting various components of the power grid. Your safety protocols are admirable, but they're solving problems that shouldn't exist if the system is designed properly in the first place. Admiral Crestu's scales had now shifted to a color that Zixtar was fairly certain indicated either deep contemplation or complete nervous breakdown. Are you saying that for the past several millennia, galactic civilization has been operating on a misunderstanding of our own technology? Not a misunderstanding, exactly, Sarah said diplomatically. More like, you inherited a bunch of technology you didn't fully understand, so you made it work the best way you knew how, which involved adding a lot of complexity to compensate for not knowing the underlying design principles. She paused, seeming to consider her words carefully. It's like if you found a perfectly good bicycle and decided it needed training wheels, a motor, 17 different types of brakes and a computerized guidance system. It still gets you where you're going, but it's not really a bicycle anymore. The room fell silent again, except for the quiet humming of various technological systems that everyone was now viewing in a completely different light. How many humans know about this? Kelenoth asked finally. Sarah shrugged. Most of us, I guess. We don't really think about it much. Technology is just technology. It works the way it works. And you never thought to mention this to anyone? Well, Sarah said reasonably, you never asked. Within 6 hours, every major government in the galaxy had representatives screaming at each other across quantum communication channels. The emergency session of the Galactic Council looked less like a diplomatic gathering and more like a support group for civilizations having collective nervous breakdowns. Chancellor Vexthor of the Zalonian hegemony was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. Are we seriously discussing the possibility that our entire technological foundation has been built on misunderstood human engineering? The evidence appears to support this conclusion, replied Councillor Thringdall of the Vorthak Collective, his mandibles clicking with what his species considered diplomatic restraint. Our technology specialists have been reviewing ancient archives since the Academy incident. The design signatures match human engineering principles across 17 different technological categories. This is preposterous, declared High Admiral Kolthis of the Nexari Confederacy, her crystalline form resonating with indignation. We have achieved faster-than-light travel, quantum computing, dimensional manipulation. Using technology we found, interrupted Archon Pelnara of the Krillian Assembly. Technology we reverse-engineered without understanding its original purpose or design philosophy. From her position at the Academy, Sarah watched the council session on the conference room's main display, with the kind of polite interest someone might show while watching neighbors argue about property lines. Occasionally, she would nod or make a small sound of understanding when someone made a particularly good point. "What's your assessment of this situation?" Kelnoth asked her during a brief recess while the various species took time to consult with their respective governments. Sarah considered the question thoughtfully. "Well, you've all done pretty impressive work with what you had. I mean, taking basic human technology and expanding it to run an entire galactic civilization is no small feat. You should be proud of that." "But," Admiral Crestu prompted, sensing there was more. "But you've also made things unnecessarily complicated in a lot of places, and you're using maybe 60% of the actual capability of most systems because you've focused on safety and redundancy instead of understanding how things actually work." She gestured toward the display, where the council session was resuming with what appeared to be several species shouting simultaneously in different frequencies. "The thing is, this doesn't have to be a crisis, it's just new information. Humans have been getting along fine without actively managing galactic technology for thousands of years. We're not going to suddenly decide we want to take over everything just because we can." "But you could," Kelanoth pointed out. "Theoretically, yes, but why would we want to? Running a galactic civilization looks like a massive headache. We've got our own planet to manage, and that's complicated enough." The council session was reaching new levels of diplomatic chaos. The representative from the Kethmorian Trade Federation was apparently suggesting that humanity be given some kind of technological oversight role, while the Nexari Confederacy was arguing for immediate restrictions on human access to critical systems. "What would you suggest?" asked Fleet Engineer Kolves, who had spent the past several hours discovering that most of his engineering expertise was based on elaborate workarounds for problems that shouldn't have existed. Sarah leaned back in her oversized chair, apparently unbothered by the fact that her answer might reshape interstellar relations for the next millennium. "Partnership," she said simply. "You've got this amazing galactic community with incredible diversity and resources. We've got technological intuition and design experience. Instead of everyone panicking about who's in charge of what, why not work together to make things better?" She pulled up the Academy's main systems display again, making modifications with casual efficiency. "Look, your communication networks could be about 3 times faster with some basic optimization. Your transportation systems could be more energy efficient. Your manufacturing processes could be streamlined. These aren't hostile takeovers, they're just improvements." "And in exchange?" Admiral Crestu asked. "We get to be part of this galactic community thing, which looks pretty interesting. Plus, we learn from your innovations too. You've developed applications for human technology that we never thought of, the crystalline data storage system the Nexari use. That's brilliant. We could never have come up with that." The council session was beginning to calm down as various species realized that humanity was apparently more interested in technological collaboration than galactic domination. "So you're proposing what, exactly?" Kulanoth asked. "A technology exchange program, formal this time, with actual understanding instead of everyone just guessing how things work. Humans help optimize and maintain galactic systems. Other species share their innovations and improvements. Everyone benefits." Sarah paused, watching as the council began discussing practical implementation rather than theoretical disasters. Besides, she added with a slight smile, it's not like you haven't been using human technology all along, we're just making it official. In the conference room's main display, the Galactic Council was beginning to draft what would eventually become the most significant technological agreement in recorded history. And Sarah Mitchell, exchange cadet from a supposedly primitive species, sat back to watch civilization accidentally stumble into its next evolutionary phase. 3 months later, the Galactic Defense Academy had settled into what could generously be called a new normal. Sarah Mitchell had been officially designated as Special Technical Advisor, which was bureaucratic language for the human who makes our technology work properly, and we're too embarrassed to admit we need her. Her official quarters had been upgraded to include what the Academy called a consultation workspace, which was actually just a room full of supposedly advanced alien technology that she fixed when it inevitably broke down in increasingly creative ways. Zixtar had initially resisted the changes with the determination of someone whose entire worldview had been fed through a particle accelerator, but after watching Sarah casually repair the Academy's quantum training simulators, devices that had been malfunctioning for years, he had been forced to admit that perhaps his species' approach to technology had been somewhat. The morning briefing indicates another system malfunction in the tactical simulation bay, he told Sarah, as she arrived for her daily rounds of fixing things that shouldn't have been broken in the first place. Which one this time? Sarah asked, accepting a cup of what the Academy optimistically called coffee, but which tasted like it had been filtered through a gym sock. The holographic projection matrix is apparently creating training scenarios that violate several laws of physics. Oh, that's probably just the reality anchor getting confused again. Your people added about 12 different verification layers to what should be a simple projection system. Sometimes it gets tied in knots trying to figure out what's supposed to be real. They walked through corridors that had become noticeably more efficient since Sarah's arrival. The environmental systems ran smoother, the lighting was more natural, and the door controls no longer required a PhD in quantum mechanics to operate. Small improvements, but ones that had made life significantly more pleasant for everyone involved. The new protocols for human cadets had been interesting to implement. It turned out that when you gave humans access to advanced technology, they had an annoying tendency to immediately figure out better ways to use it. The Academy had started what they diplomatically called collaborative technology sessions, which mostly involved human cadets gently suggesting improvements, while alien instructors pretended this had been their plan all along. How are the other human students adapting? Zixtar asked as they approached the tactical simulation bay. Pretty well, though I think Marcus accidentally improved your shield generator efficiency by 30% yesterday while trying to figure out how it worked. The engineering department is still trying to process that. Zixtar's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. 3 months ago, he would have considered such casual competence impossible. Now he was beginning to suspect that humans had been deliberately downplaying their capabilities for reasons that probably made sense from a diplomatic perspective. They arrived at the simulation bay to find Cadet Voxtel standing in front of a projection system that was displaying what appeared to be a tactical scenario involving rainbow-colored explosions and gravity that changed direction every few seconds. It started doing this about an hour ago, he explained, pointing at the display with 2 of his 4 arms, while covering his visual sensors with the other 2. The reality matrix seems to be having some kind of artistic crisis. Sarah examined the control panel with the kind of professional assessment that had become disturbingly familiar to Academy staff. Yeah, this is just a cascade error in the verification protocols. Someone tried to update the physics parameters without understanding how the underlying reality engine works. She touched a few controls and the display immediately shifted to a perfectly normal tactical scenario involving standard explosions and gravity that pointed in a sensible direction. There you go. Though honestly, you might want to consider simplifying this whole system. Right now you're using about 50 times more processing power than necessary to create basic holographic projections. Cadet Voxdale stared at the now functional display with the expression of someone whose expectations had just been recalibrated. How did you know what to do? Same way you know how to breathe, Sarah replied with a shrug. It's just intuitive. As they left the simulation bay, Zixtar found himself reflecting on how much had changed since that first morning when Sarah had walked through the scanner and accidentally revealed that galactic civilization had been built on a foundation of technological misunderstanding. The Academy was running better, the students were learning more, and everyone had been forced to acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, they had been making things more complicated than necessary for the past few millennia. "Sarah," he said as they walked back toward the main corridor, "I believe I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For assuming your species was primitive." Sarah considered this thoughtfully. "Well, to be fair, we do still use duct tape to fix half our problems, though in our defense, duct tape works really well." Behind them, the tactical simulation bay was humming contentedly, operating at peak efficiency for the first time in decades. And in academies across the galaxy, alien instructors were slowly coming to terms with the reality that sometimes the best way to understand advanced technology was to ask the species that had originally designed it. Even if they had spent the last few thousand years pretending to be primitive for the sake of galactic peace,